Hey everyone, Phreak here. Welcome to my patch 7.24 rundown for League of Legends. This is an interesting patch because I like it a lot. I think there's a lot of really good things in it. This is the second patch after the release of Runes Reforged. This is the first patch that actually gave the designers a chance to really look at data and make real choices. For those who don't really know how the patches work, they're generally locked about a week before they come out, and as you may know, patches come out every 2 weeks, and so you have to kind of already plan your changes. You can get data after a couple of days, but then the patch is locked and no longer allowed to be edited after, let's say 4 days after you get any data at all. Which doesn't give you very much time to test hypotheses. If you make the wrong changes, it's hard to go back on them, and so 7.23 did not have a lot of good reactions outside of some really obvious things like Aerie being overpowered, and it was just like a simple damage nerf. Aerie, by the way, still seems probably a bit too strong, even on pure offensive users. We're going to get to that at another time. But 7.24, I think, has a lot of very good changes. Another thing to point out is there's going to be a patch 7.24b. I would have called it 0.25 personally, but it's their choice, not mine. And it's going to be coming out in, I want to say, about like 8-ish days after this patch comes out. So it's like roughly a week after 7.24 comes out. There's going to be 7.24b, and 24b will be the last patch of the year. 8.1 will come out in January, and 8.1 will be the patch for the pro scene. All right, enough preamble. Let's get into it. Patch highlights video. Watch that if you want. It'll definitely be about 2% as long as this video. You might just do that instead. All right, so buffs to Aurelion Sol. As it mentions, there are buffs to Phase Rush coming on later on in the patch, but basically Aurelion Sol is getting a flat 10-second off the cooldown buff. Their context is actually less than what I know from them. As we look at this little chart, it's fairly reasonable cooldown. What's funny is you can look at the percentages, and obviously the 10 seconds means more when the cooldown is lower in the first place, so the percentage goes up. But they specifically wanted to do something that buffed his level 6, which is the level 1 cooldown buff. Because Aurelion Sol right now works as more of an early mid-game champion, and the designers tend to want to keep those identities. And so if Aurelion Sol is good early to mid, they're going to make sure that if they're going to buff him back to viability, they buff the early to mid. What's interesting is Aurelion Sol tends to be a champion that will always have like a 53% win rate if he's kind of roughly balanced. Which sounds weird, and the reason is because pretty much only Aurelion Sol mains play him. For those of you who saw an article come out, I want to say about 2 weeks ago or so on LeagueOfLegends.com, it talked about champions that are broadly accessible and champions that are deeply accessible, that like people play them a lot when they do play them, but maybe not so broadly. And Aurelion Sol is one of these champions that when he's played deeply. And so the average Aurelion Sol is more experienced at his champion than your average Darius. And so Aurelion Sol will tend to be winninger than a Darius because Aurelion Sol players are better than Darius players, if that all makes sense to you. All right, we're going to move on, though. Anyway, I think he's deserving of buffs. It won't be a lot, honestly. I think the Phase Rush buffs later on will mean more for him. It's still one of his best keystones. Let's move on. Bard getting a pretty substantial buff to his health regen and the base damage on his meat. Note that both these mean the most at level 1. Of course, health regen still scales, and he's keeping his +2, and the meep damage is still going to go up regardless. But here's the table on Bard. It's a very substantial health regen buff to the tune of almost 40%. Keep in mind, of course, he's going to be having health potions at all times. If he goes Ancient Coin, I believe Ancient Coin has health regen on it, although that's percentage based, that wouldn't actually make a difference here. But because he has health potions and a health pool in the first place, this is not, I'm 40% more durable, because potions are part of this regen, but of course it's still a very meaningful buff. As far as the meep damage, of course you can see it goes down. I did it every 5 chimes because every 5 chimes the damage goes up by 15, and you can see it's still a pretty meaningful buff to damage as well. I didn't count his auto attack damage. Maybe I should have, because you cannot really land a chime without the auto attack landing in the first place, but oh well. But you can see that even if you get pretty late into the game, 60 chimes is a pretty high number. It's still a 5% damage buff on the ability, so it's pretty meaningful. Keep in mind, right, Bard can arm multiple meeps over the course of time. And so he can hit you with like 3 meeps in a trade, which is now 30 bonus damage. So, it really does add up. These are both pretty nice for Bard. Yeah, I think this brings Bard up to another great spot. It's his second round of major buffs, the first one being his giant rework to the chime system in the first place. Anyway, I think Bard is a cool champion, and I'm glad to see him getting some small buffs. Camille is the first of many champions getting buffs because Fervor of Battle is gone. I know I've seen the Reddit audience talk about this a fair bit. It does not seem like there are great keystones right now for melee AD fighters. Press the attack is just not always that synergistic. Lethal tempo is awkward. I mean, Fervor was just raw attack damage, and it stacked twice as fast if you were melee and if you were ranged. So 4 autos gave you a ton of AD. It made sense that was their best keystone. And so for a lot of these champions like Camille and Darius and whatnot, it's compensation. Now, there is some work going in behind the scenes for those of you who have looked at the PBE patch notes for what's probably 8.1. There's like some considerations to Grasp of the Undying that might make it give attack damage instead of health and things like this. And so, there will be more changes to champions like Camille and Darius, especially if they find themselves a better keystone in the future. Champions have to be balanced in the system that they're in. And so with Fervor of Battle gone, it was as a power drop. If Grasp of the Undying is buff for them, it'll be a power buff. And this will not be the last we see of Camille or Darius, before the end of 2018, almost certainly, as far as patches are concerned. Either way, 1/3 longer on the passive shield, a bit more window to press your Q. This is more of a helpful for new players things. This still can help Camille experts, but it will sort of more proportionally affect bad Camille players. The shield, I think, kind of affects both halves quite a lot. If you were bad at Camille, you didn't know the shield was this long. I don't play much Camille. I didn't realize it was under 2 seconds long in the first place. Bad Camille certainly wouldn't realize how short it is, so this helps them actually have a shield when they're going for a trade. But a good player now has another half second to play around with this sort of semi-invulnerability, because that shield, people don't want to trade against a shield that's going to time out. So cool little buffs to Camille, who was being a little bit weak. I think she was in the high 40s only, 48 or something. So, and these are very small, right? This is going to be like a 0.5% to a 1% run rate buff for Camille. I would say this is higher, and this is probably 0.5% as well for Aurelion Sol. This doesn't seem very large, but Phase Rush is the bigger deal, so Aurelion Sol go up quite a bit. Darius, pretty mathy changes. He's doing more damage with his bleed. He's getting more attack damage as well. So we go over here. This is the first one up. The bleed damage is just up a flat 3 at all levels. Keep in mind the bleed can stack 5 times, so the bleed can go up 15 damage, and then more if you refresh it. Either way, it's still the same percentage difference. The bleed does scale off attack damage, though, and so those numbers aren't always accurate, because the real damage of the bleed is not 30% higher because he's going to have attack damage, but that's at least the base damage difference is there. It's a fairly meaningful buff. It's not huge, but it exists. The attack damage buff is actually quite nice. You're going to see some pretty substantial numbers here. I did hear the amount of passive AD granted by the passive as opposed to his total AD with the passive on. I'm still kind of debating whether or not I should do one or the other. The amount of total AD the champion gets, or just the raw power of the ability. You'll see I'll go back and forth in this video with different champions, but anything past a level 1 all in, there's more attack damage than the champion. So pretty substantial buffs to Darius. I didn't think he was doing that badly, it felt like, but and I don't remember his numbers exactly, how badly or well he was doing, but hey, some small buffs with attack damage is going to feel good for Darius. And it all really comes down to if he can get his bleeds onto you, and really getting to the 5 stack is the big deal, right? This bonus AD is only on the 5 stack or on an ultimate execute. Small changes to Evelyn. Recommended items updated based on people figuring out what's good on her, and then the designers looking at data. That'll be a win rate buff for Evelyn just in general, because bad Evelyns will buy the right items more often. Revealed by a turret warning is nice for the passive, and now you have a, let's say, 3% or so. Well, it's going to be more than 3%, but a damage amp to the first ability used after the W triggers, so that you can actually use the shred with it. So that's kind of nice. These are straight up all Evelyn buffs. Evelyn will gain win rate. This is probably the biggest one of the patch, honestly. There have been it doesn't happen with all champions, but there have been several examples of champions getting a ton of win rate because of recommended item changes. So Evelyn will probably gain some, especially because she's still a bit new. There's still a lot of new Evelyns who don't know what to build on her, and this will help quite a bit. Ezreal, the strongest champion in the game in patch 7.23, is getting probably not a big enough of a nerf. I think he's still going to remain easily top 3, and I think probably still the number 1 win rate-wise bot lane marksman in League of Legends. This is a pretty substantial nerf. It's 0.15 total AD off the ratio, meaning yes, it's his base stats count as well. but here is the table for the Ezreal damage. So first off, it's if you have no items, no runes, nothing at all, you just simply Mystic Shot some people. All right, a level 1 Mystic Shot did 115 damage if you didn't know. No one does 115 damage at level 1, but Ezreal does, so strong champion. That's down by 10. It goes down by 16 damage at the end of it all. At level 18, it's 16 less damage. Okay, and you can see, hey, it's an 8% damage dip. And to be fair, 8% is a very meaningful difference in damage. I mean, when Ezreal fights you in lane, probably at least half his damage is from Mystic Shots. Yes, in a dedicated trade, he'll auto more than twice per Mystic Shot, but much more often, he's only Mystic Shotting you. And so this is a very substantial cut to his actual trading power. And it persists throughout the game. What's interesting, of course, is, again, it's an attack damage ratio, but Ezreal buys things that aren't just attack damage. He builds things like Trinity Force and Muramana. And I want to point out with this math, I am not counting the Ezreal spending his mana to turn it into Muramana damage part of this chart. It is the raw attack damage granted by Trinity Force, the raw attack damage granted by Muramana, and the raw mana to attack damage granted by a mana moon or upgraded item as well, but not the spend mana to deal damage part of it. As you can see, that the inclusion of Triforce's base damage and all the extra Muramana stuff, and then that compensated by his attack damage ratios being lower, it is still a very similar sort of amount cut. The amount cut is snuffed a little bit here, and especially if you count the sort of the mana burn damage, the spending your mana to deal damage, this will be further cut down the value, but it's still a appreciable cut in his damage, even on a somewhat larger build. And if you build towards things like Blade of Ruin King, or you build a Mercurial Scimitar, or you build a Lord Dominix or Guards, those are items that are pure AD and nothing else, and that will, you know, push these numbers back up in how much the nerf matters. Again, I think Ezreal is still going to be exceptionally strong, but I do think this has a measurable and meaningful cut into his damage output, but I think he's still overpowered. Galio, unfortunately, the designer is still having a problem in finding where to put him. I do think, and I've always felt this, the right way to put the champion is to have meaningful ability power ratios, you know, acceptable damage output if built full tank, but, you know, should be properly rewarded for building AP. It's interesting because I looked at him a while ago, and in solo queue, the most common first item on the champion was a Rod of Ages, whereas in pro play, they only built him full tank. And Galio's a champion who was very, very common in pro play, and was a very low win rate champion in solo queue. And so it stands to reason if you wanted to, like, bridge the gap a little bit, you'd continue to push him towards the ability power ratio side of things, so that Rod of Ages first purchase actually buffs him in solo queue, makes him a stronger champion, and the full tank pro play Galio was going to be weaker as a result. Of course, they went too far like 3 patches ago or whatever. Obviously, we all remember the full AP Galio montages. Anyway, here they are now, and what they're, I guess, trying to do is spread out his damage a bit more, where now every single ability of his does damage. And I actually like this, having a champion have damage abilities on all the abilities, because it means that your damage can keep scaling throughout the game, right? If you're playing, let's say, mid lane Morgana, you stop gaining damage after level 13 because you just put points in Black Shield, and all you can do is try to buy more ability power, and you fall off a cliff. And Victor has a little bit of this as well with his W, but at least his augment gives him AP per level, and it softens the blow a little bit. But you know, for some champions, it can be really, really frustrating that you just kind of fall off a cliff, and I like that Galio has a few more choices here, and you know, the W giving some damage output. None of this is really worth mathing out, by the way. I mean, I could have, to be honest, and looked at what the AP ratio difference meant for him, but at the end of the day, there's a 2-second cooldown off the E, which is pretty nice. Theoretically, a cooldown buff like this makes you want to more likely max E sooner, because going from 12 to 8 is a bigger jump than going from 14 to 10 as far as cooldowns are concerned. Either way, the W doing up to 180 plus 0.6 ability power damage is certainly a potential damage buff. And to be fair, these are intended to be Galio buffs. You lose a 0.2 AP ratio here, you gain a 0.6 there. But in terms of an all-in, you can trigger Colossal Smash 2 to 3 times if you can layer your abilities right, whereas Shielded Duran is really only ever going to go out once. But it is, of course, going to hit multiple champions potentially, and you can get an extra burst of damage there. So, you know, some give and some take. I would think that even if you just did this would be a buff to Galio, because you've added base damage to the kit. But it's a reasonably low base damage and a reasonable ability power ratio such that it feels workable on this regard. Apparently sometimes partially channeled W's were also too short, so that's another big buff to Galio, obviously, as well. And again, the E buff. So yeah, I mean, this will give Galio, I'm going to say I would say 2.5 to 3% more win rate. I think it's going to jump pretty substantially with this patch. Again, we're not going to see Galio on 724 in pro play at all. It'll be 8.1, so the designers will react to whatever this is. And if it's bonkers, just like the last set of Galio changes, then they'll cut him down a little bit, and we'll see what it looks like for 8.1. Ivern tends to be pretty weak, although, to be fair, Ivern is actually better than you think if you just actually run Guardian and then secondarily Airy. One thing Ivern did lose out on was... my brain's going to work in a second, I promise. One thing he lost out on was movement speed quints. Now that he still can't run movement speed, but basically Celerity is such a strong rune, and other junglers had to run AP quints or attack speed quints or AD quints. Move speed quints were the best rune in the game by a lot. They were actually highest win rate rune in pretty much every champion ever at all times, always. They were actually just stupid good. And Ivern could get away with that because he had no stat requirements to jungle. He got to run the best rune in the game. The opportunity cost for running Celerity, which is the move speed rune in Runes Reforged, is significantly lower, especially for other junglers, and just everyone's running Celerity now. And so Ivern's no longer faster than other champions. And I think this was mentioned in the 7.23 or 22, I think 23 context when they buffed Ivern. I think last time, I think they did. But I guess he's still not doing very well, and so they're buffing the health cost, or reducing the amount it hurts him, to plant a grove onto a jungle camp. Here's these numbers there. It's about 25 to 30 something % cost help, right? It only costs you about 3/4 as much HP, which is a very big deal. Really quite nice. It means you can plant 4 camps for the cost of 3 in the past, and that's a really big deal. So he's much healthier in the jungle, and again, the context paragraph talks about this, where he's dying to other junglers and it's hurting him with the invades. And so this is the mechanic where they get to tune Ivern's health based on jungling, and this is what it was for, right? This is the entire reason why this exists, why it's based off his base health, and all these other things is a tuning mechanism to allow Ivern to have the right amount of health while jungling. So designers are using it. Great, not a big surprise. Nerfs to Jarvan. If you guys watched Worlds, you know that Jarvan was incredibly strong. He got even better with Electrocute because the giant cooldown on Electrocute compared to Thunderlords doesn't matter for a jungler because you're only triggering it once per gank anyway, whereas a laner would trigger it several times during the laning phase, and the cooldown is actually meaningful. For a jungler, it's not the case. So the fact that Electrocute does roughly double the damage doesn't matter the cooldown's twice as long, it does double the damage. And so all the Electrocute junglers got way stronger. Jarvan is insanely high in win rate, for example. I know the designer who's on this was considering should he buff and nerf only tank Jarvan or only AD Jarvan or both. He decided on the fact that both versions of Jarvan, Cinderhulk and Warrior, were overperforming, and so it's base damage nerfs because those will affect both sides of Jarvan. And also Jarvan top was doing very well also. So 0 to 20 damage off the Dragon Strike and 20% of the damage off Martial Cadence, or 2% based on how you like to view things. So this is the passive plus auto attack damage if Jarvan were hitting another full health Jarvan. This is not a fair comparison. Jarvan is often EQ then auto his targets. If you're top lane Jarvan, you're often higher level than your opponents. Thus, using Jarvan as the health total is a bit unfair. Jarvan often builds attack damage. If he's jungling with Warrior, that's 65. If he's got a T-Mat, that's another 25 or 30 or something like that. If he's top lane, he's going Titanic plus Cleaver, that's another 70 or so. And so in none of these cases are these numbers really that fair, but this is the best I could do to give you a reasonably honest estimate, and then realize the fact that if you're hitting tanks, or the tanks are injured, or you've built attack damage, or other things, or your opponents are lower level than you, these numbers shift around. But on the passive plus auto attack damage output, and keep in mind, this is not the damage of the passive, this is the damage of the passive plus his base AD. Right? This is how much damage the whole smack does in total to a full health Jarvan of the same level as Jarvan. His base AD is something like 65. You can see what the numbers are by kind of looking at it afterwards. But you can see that, the entire smack is still doing about 10% less damage. That's meaningful. That is, of course, meaningful. Of course, the passive itself just does a flat 20% less damage than before. No one's surprised here. That's exactly what the numbers tell you. And so this is a more rolled in version where, again, these numbers will continue to soften because Jarvan will typically be building more attack damage than his enemies have health. Also, he'll be typically doing more damage to them with his abilities at the start as well, thus also snuffing, sort of defeating the value of these nerfs. So this is not as big as it looks. It really is not as big as it looks because he does a lot more in the game, but of course this is pretty meaningful. Here's the damage on Dragon Strike. It's an 8% cut as well. And so realistically, he's using 8% on Q, 8% on his passive-ish. And yeah, that's about what's happened to him. And that seems about right for a champion with like a 54-something% win rate. Buffs to Karthus. Karthus is interesting because Karthus for the longest time, after looking at his numbers, has abysmal, I mean terrible AP ratios. They are so low by comparison to the rest of his damage. Karthus' AP ratios are hot garbage. And thankfully, once we started seeing Karthus in pro play over the last year, we saw the pros somehow realize this, and they were all doing flat pen builds. They were all getting Deathfire Touch, they were getting Sork Shoes, they're getting a Haunting Guys early, and they maybe got one of a Rod of Ages or a Seraph's Embrace, but they weren't doing the Seraphs plus Roa plus Death Cap AP stacking build because AP stacking was the wrong way to play him. Yes, you build ability power, but you build pen because the base damages are higher. This softens this somewhat to the point where maybe you might want to consider building a Death Cap earlier on in your build once again. Maybe you're not going to rush Haunting Guys every single game. Now, I certainly think Haunting Guys is overpowered right now, and that item deserves a nerf, or, you know, the designers should kind of look a bit more closely at how much damage these things do, but either way, pretty meaningful buff there to him. So I wrote a very small table of his R rank, the base damage plus the ratio old, the base damage plus the ratio new. And I said, okay, if you built 100 ability power, how much more damage does your ultimate now deal? Of course, every 100 AP is 15 damage because math, it's not very hard. But you can see what percentage more damage the ability does, right? 100 AP level 6 Karthus does 5% more damage with his ultimate than he used to before. That's the value of the AP ratio. Level 16 Karthus, of course, the base damage is twice as high. Unsurprisingly, the bonus from the AP is roughly half that as well. Right? The higher level Karthus is, and in a weird way, the later game you go, the less his buff matters, other than the fact that you have access to more AP to buff this. But, you know, you're seeing this kind of situation. And again, if you get ahead, you're a level 10 Karthus with 200 AP, you're doing 10% more damage in the ultimate, and that is a very meaningful damage difference. This is certainly a big buff to Karthus. I'm sorry, my nose is like really, really itchy. Apologize for that. Yeah, this is going to bump him 1 to 1.5%. I'm going to say this is quite nice. Now, of course, Requiem's cooldown is exceptionally long. It's 200, 180, 160. It's very, very, very long. I am not sure if a change like this makes you want to stop building CDR and go for more raw AP, because theoretically, Morellonomicon is a good item on Karthus because your ultimate cooldown is so damn long, you really want more of it. I don't know. This also puts more of Karthus' power budget into his ultimate, which actually slightly raises the value of Ultimate Hat, which is kind of interesting as well. Even though he has such a long cooldown on the ultimate and it's hard to get the 5 stacks, that first ultimate is more important because it does more damage, and, you know, there's just small ramifications with Karthus as far as build is concerned. I think we'll figure them out over the next few months. Leona, I think everyone understands this, is by far easily the best support in the game. She does insane damage. Aftershock is incredibly strong as well, and she is stupid good. So she's losing 20 damage off of Eclipse from level 1 and in perpetuity. Of course, every time you use the W, you almost always have the passive trigger as well, and so I added the W to her passive for this table. Leona pretty much never learns W until level 3, so I didn't include those values into the table at all either. And as you can tell, obviously, and then also she maxes W first, and so in a way, the 20 damage cut doesn't necessarily mean as much. That's a bit hazy, but it's kind of true. And so, yeah, at level 3, you know, with the W doing 20 less damage, it's actually an 80% cut to what W plus a Sunlight trigger would do. By mid to late game, it's less than 10%. It's not that big of a deal. Mostly this is a laning phase nerf. Honestly, they probably could have let... Actually, no, I think it's correct they didn't go 40 to 220. I think I'm glad they did 40 to 200, because honestly, she maxes this first. It gets to level 9. She's got it maxed already. Leona is simply doing too much damage in the lane. She's just destroying everyone. I think it's reasonable to nerf her. This is a maybe 1% win rate nerf. Malzahar changes, nerfs, yes. His R has arguably the least gameplay of any of his abilities, and so it's getting cut by 0, 25, 50 damage and 0.3 ability power. This was kind of a weird one to math out because there is still the null zone pool underneath the percent health damage thing underneath that. So first off, here's the base damage changes. Right, same at level 1, 10% off at level 2, 15% off at level 3. Okay, great. AP ratio, of course, is exactly the same. It's a 27.7% damage cut. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, great. What I looked at is I looked at the ratio based on how much AP he had, 150, 300, 450. Could have gone to 600, maybe even 750 with like a very late game build, but you're kind of seeing how much damage he's really losing with this one, right? He's losing 0 to 25 to 50 damage on the ultimate, and he's losing another 50 damage off the ultimate at 150 AP. At like I think it's probably like 166, I think would be the number. This nerf is duplicated every 166 ability power. So the ratio nerf is arguably the bigger nerf, especially considering the fact that the level 6 damage did not go anywhere. So between level 6 and 10, it is not nerfed except for the ratio. And by level 10, you probably have 166 AP. It's pretty likely. So the ratio nerf is actually quite large. It's the bigger of the two nerfs. And then what I looked at is I said, okay, Malzahar, you are going to ult another Malzahar without items because that's just the safest way to do the math. You're going to ult another Malzahar. And because the suppression is 2.5 seconds long, we're going to say that they can stay in the pool for 3 seconds. They get one more tick and they flash out. Okay? So if you're ulting another Malzahar at every given level for Malzahar's HP and the ability rank ups, obviously, additionally, how much damage comes out from the pool for 3 seconds. And additionally, I said at level 6, you have 100 ability power. And every level beyond that is 40 more. So 100, 140, 180, 220. I mean, this would be about 500 at this point. 540, 580. Right? So a pretty good spectrum of ability power. I mean, 580 AP at level 18 seems fair-ish. Yes, you can go higher, but that's a decent number to land on. And so those felt like fair numbers to use. That if you count everything all together, right, your 1380 damage ultimate for 3 seconds in the null zone plus all the R damage and the AP ratio at a full build becomes 1158 or 1156, which, hey, is still a 60% cut in the damage. That is a meaningful cut in his highest damage ability. You know, every team fight, he's going to cast his ability. And to his primary target, he will do 200 less damage to that target. He will do 200 less damage to his primary target. That is a fact. But for everyone else, the null zone is unaffected. For the value of the suppression in the first place, that value is unaffected as well. There is certainly some power to be had. This is a nerf. It definitely hurts 1v1. His team fight is less affected. His catch is less affected. But it still matters. It's still a nerf. Malzahar down 1, maybe 2%. This is a meaningful damage nerf to a single target. There will be champions that get away as a result of these nerfs, for sure. For sure. This one surprised me a little bit. I've been keeping track very closely of how tanks are doing in League of Legends right now. Maokai apparently is doing too well. He's one of the high magic damage tanks in the top lane, who was never running Magic Pen marked, but he's still got compensation for attack speed. And I remember when I mentioned this in the 722 batch rundown, I talked about all the magic damage dealers who didn't run Magic Pen, who still got marks compensation, which is all the tanks in the top lane, are going to be doing better here. Maokai, one of the prime examples here. He gets 25 less damage off his 5 to 25 less damage off his Q. There's a damage output there, 7 to 10%. Not huge, but still meaningful, especially for the ability he does max first. It's 25 damage off every single trade ever, after level 9, of course. Also, being a CDR builder, he's going to be doing this 25 damage a lot, and it's that flat out 10% less damage on the Q. Hey, that's meaningful. There are some compensations for this later on in the patch, though. We'll get to that in a little bit. Morgana. Pretty actually big changes to Morg. Well, it's weird. It's both really big and really small changes to Morgana. 3 more mana per 5 at level 1. But it's 0.4 less per level, roughly, right? Scaling. Spell Vamp is flat out gone. Instead, you only heal against champions, large minions, and large monsters. And a large minion is a cannon minion. That's it. And a large minion is more or less a smiteable minion, right? I'm assuming it's going to count huge minions like Baron Nashor and Elder Dragon and Drake and whatnot, but Gromp, Blue Buff, the Big Wolf, the Big Raptor, the Big Krug, you get spell bump off those. So And then one more thing, as we go through that, Tormented Soil's cooldown is reduced by 5% whenever you trigger this heal. And I believe Tormented Soil triggers twice per second, and it should go tick, 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 and keep chopping 5% off. I'm going to assume it's the current cooldown of the W, not the max cooldown. I'm almost certain of that. I could totally be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. Tormented Soil goes down to a 10-second cooldown at max rank, and it lasts 5, so it ticks 10 times. It's a lot of cooldown you're getting back. It's pretty much with any CDR going to be permanently available if your target sticks into it. Let's talk about what this all means. Okay, so first off, here's the MP5 set of it all. Before level 10, you have more mana regen. And in fact, level 1, it's a crap ton more. I want to point out several things. This is a bigger buff to support Morgana than it is to mid Morgana, because support Morgana has a Spell Thief's Edge, which gives percent MP5, which multiplies this buff. Mid Morgana has a Doran's Ring, which, while it does give percent MP5, gives flat mana restore on minion kill, which means that's unaffected entirely. So slightly less effective for mid Morgana. Also, as support Morgana, you are going to be level 9 or lower for a larger portion of the game than mid Morgana. So again, this probably still helps mid Morg. Like, I don't think late game mid Morgana has mana regen issues typically. I feel like it's kind of hard to run out of mana. I remember, obviously you can, but like it's not that big of a deal. But certainly is a huge deal for the Morgana support's laning phase. Let's talk about Spell Vamp. Spell Vamp, as a mechanic in the game, is 1/3 as effective for damage dealt by area of effect abilities. If it's called Spell Vamp, it works that way. So Dark Binding, full value. Whatever's on the sticker, whatever's on the tin, that's how much you get back. Tormented Soil gives you 1/3 of the value per target. So if you were able to Tormented Soil an entire minion wave of 6 minions, then yes, you would do 20% of the like damage on the tooltip because you're hitting 6 things for 1/3 value. Hopefully that makes sense for you. And so the numbers in a lot of ways go up. And because it's not called Spell Vamp, it's damage her abilities deal. It's always the full value. And so this value, of course, you can see in almost all cases is higher, especially earlier on in the game, right? Where it's like 200% from 4 through 6. Keep in mind, her ultimate only ever hit champions and was a multi-target ability. Her ultimate does like 200-something damage on both halves. I think it goes up to like 400 or something on max rank. Which means that if you're on level 16 Morgana, not only is the Spell Vamp value double, but it's also not cut in 1/3 by being an AoE ability, which means the amount of heal from your ultimate is 6x as high. Holy moly! Morgana will like full heal with her ultimate. She will literally flash into 5 people and go to full HP. Holy moly! That is so insane. That is so much health. She just became Swain. And that's a huge deal. So while the mana regen ticking down is going to feel bad, and the W not working on Spellbank minis anymore, this is huge. This is huge. And your Q, if it hits a large minion or a large monster or a champion, is always going to do more healing. Of course, if it's a cast minion, it's less. Hey, it's less then. But if you hit a bind on a champion, okay, 1.5x, 2x as much healing. You then put a W under the champion, and it's somewhere between 4.5 and 6x as much healing. Then you ult the champion, and it's 4.5 to 6x as much healing. Actually, it can never be 4.5x because it stops being only 150 by that point. It's 4 to 5 to 6x as much healing. I mean, this is nuts. 5 to 6 as much healing. It's nuts. I mean, after level 4, it is always 5 to 6x for your W and your ultimate. She's going to spell vamp so goddamn much in League of Legends. And mid Morgana cares about the spell vamp more than support Morgana does. Okay, so like, we're unpacking both halves of the changes, right? Support Morgana gets a ton out of this. Mid Morgana doesn't sustain off the waves as much, and hey, that's a big deal. But this is just bonkers in a lot of cases. I also want to bring up this and this. Morgana gets so much health back and has so much mana regen. I think you can jungle Morgana. I think you can now effectively jungle Morgana. Your W is going to tick 10 times for sure on every single camp you ever attack. Your Q will hit for full damage and spell vamp for full value. Your W will hit for full value and spell vamp for full value. It will reduce the cooldown next tormented soil by, let's say, 30%. Which means that with almost any CDR at all, W is on roughly permanently, dealing damage and spell vamping for full value. You buy Runic Echoes, which gives you move speed as a great stat for Morgana. And the difficulty is going to be, what do I max first? Do I max Q for bind? Or for bind duration? Do I max W for faster clearing? And I don't know. I don't know that answer. But I think you can jungle Morgana. I think it's going to be really interesting. And one other thing I want to bring up to talk about mid lane Morg is again, yes, she's not going to have the spell vamp against the minions in lane anymore. But because 1 through 9, she has more mana regen, she's going to push an insane amount. She's going to have so much better wave pushing. She pretty much can't and will keep one-shotting minion waves. I'm pretty sure Morgana is just straight busted in every role after this patch. This seems freaking nuts. I'm so excited. Morgana was one of my very first mains when I played League of Legends. Like, I still have memories of playing in 2010. And, I mean, I literally would win a game with my only item being Doran's Ring. Because the spell vamp and mana regen were just so high that I would lane mid. I would win my lane. I'd get my all-ins with my ultimate and shit. And we just push down the lanes and I would win. I'd literally only have a Doran's Ring. I've won more than one game with my end game items with literally Doran's Ring on Morgana. From like 2010. This is one of my favorite champions that I ever used to play. I think she's super, super fun. I want to see her back in mid lane because I think Morgana is super interesting mid. Because I talked about it earlier in the video. Champions that don't have a 3rd damage ability or a 4th damage ability can fall off because you're suddenly maxing Black Shield now. And what are you supposed to do with your life? I think it's a super interesting, compelling mechanic where at a certain point the champion's damage falls off and switches roles. I think mid-game role switching is super compelling in League of Legends. And I think that's really, really interesting. And I'm super excited to see Morgana get more play. I think she's going to be nuts. I know a lot of people really, really want to see Ornn nerfs. I think Ornn is insane in pro play. He's getting 1 cooldown chopped onto to the W, and he's losing 2% of the health damage off the W. Here's the numbers there. Pretty substantial nerf to his damage output. Pretty substantial nerf to his cooldowns as well. You are still going to max W first, so the real numbers you want to look at is kind of this stuff. And really, I mean, his W is the ability with the least gameplay for his opponents. It's the most gameplay for Ornn because he can immune stuns, he can immune Lee Sin kicks, he can shield burst damage. It's how he trades and then wants to auto attack you afterwards. And Ornn has a lot of gameplay with this, but there's not a lot you can do on the other end of Ornn. But what's interesting as well is because it's his primary offensive and primary defensive tool, a cooldown is a very meaningful nerf. For a lot of champions, cooldown is not that big of a nerf for them. It doesn't mean all that much. For Ornn, it is because he can go for a trade and then have a much longer lockout where he can no longer immune Rammus Taunt or get around the Power Ball or all these other things or immune the Malphite ultimate and whatnot. It is definitely a meaningful difference to have your primary ability have its cooldown changed. Even if it's only 8 to 9, that's still 30% bump. It's still meaningful. That 1 second can be abused. And I think the damage nerf is enough, honestly, that this just might drop Ornn off permaban pro play status. I'm not sure, but I think so. We'll see what happens. I have not played against a lot of Ornns. I've not personally had a lot of huge issues. I think Ornn is only a problem in pro play. I think he is fine if you're anything below Diamond in solo queue. I honestly believe that. If you are not Diamond, Ornn is not overpowered. For Doublelift, it's overpowered because Doublelift can't dodge skill shots. And if you're, a Diamond 3 Riven main, Ornn is overpowered because you can't freaking lane against him. But if you're Plat 4 or Silver 3 or Gold 2 or Bronze 1 or you play normal games, Ornn is not overpowered, and now he's just, a bit weaker. And yeah, he was a completely serviceable tank, but I don't think he was broken for anyone else. So generally speaking, I like that I mean, basically, like, I'm slightly overanalyzing it, but these are the nerfs that most effectively affect high tier play and pro play, because they are the abilities that you can't, as an opponent, play around. Right? There's no gameplay on the receiving end. Again, I talked about that before. There's no gameplay on the receiving end of Bellow's Breath, and so gameplay is one of the biggest strengths a defending player can have. If you have gameplay, I can outplay you. And if this ability has no gameplay on the receiving end, you can't outplay them, so being skilled doesn't help you against Ornn, which is why I'm glad this is the ability getting nerfed, not something else. Right? And this is why like they nerf this instead of like going back on the E change, because the E has gameplay. You can dodge the skill shot. Great! Here's another champion, one of many, who's getting buffs because Forever Battle is gone. 0.05 to the total attack damage ratio, and 5 on the base damage of Broken Wings. This is Riven counting her base stats, the damage per Q, right? It's very interesting. This ability has a 10 or 15 base damage. The ability actually does like 58 or 66 damage because the base AD ratio is such a bigger deal. The 6.7%, by the way, that I wrote right here, because you max Q first, so at level 9, you no longer have a base damage on the ability anymore, and it just kind of stays here at the 6% thing going on. The reason I have this is Riven buys a lot of attack damage, and 6.7% is the value of the AD buff, right? This buff, right, approaches a limit asymptotically of 106.7% more, damage, and that's the number you reach to. I wrote it down because I thought it was interesting for you guys to know. Other top laners who are overperforming though, Shen has a lot of really great choices. Grasp is good on him. For support, Guardian's really good on him. Aftershock is pretty good in top lane. Also, Aftershock's pretty good on support as well. But basically, honestly, Shen was doing probably a bit too much damage in his jungle, and he loses a flat 10 damage off the Q. And so I looked at this table, and I said, okay, this is his Q plus his auto attack plus the percent health damage fighting against another Shen, because you cannot use Q without the rest of the damage being part of it. This felt fair to me. You might not agree, but this is how I tend to do some of these numbers. It's his base auto attack damage. It's the percent health damage targeting another Shen of the same level, no items included, and the base damage of the Q itself. And you're seeing a 10 to eventually down to 4% damage nerf. And in fact, that nerf's going to be even lower over time because he's going to build the Tiamat. The target's going to have more health, etc., etc., etc. But in the very early game, it is a 10% cut to his Q damage. That's pretty meaningful. And in terms of raw damage, of course, it's a flat 10 damage off. And you use Q 3 times, so it's a 30 damage off the trades at all times, which is certainly a pretty meaningful change in damage output. Okay. Sona is still the best support in the game. Oh my god, yes. Oh, she's so strong. She is so dumb good. Unfortunately for all of us bot lane mains, well, fortunately, the Sona nerfs were bigger than the Ezreal nerfs, so Sona is actually probably balanced, or at least as balanced as she's probably going to be. And Ezreal's still kind of nuts. This Q cost nerf is a really big deal. Now, if you are actually a good Sona and you play Sona in pro play, or just sort of high tier competitive, you should actually be maxing W first. Yes, you'll put that point in Q. Yes, you'll get your spell thieves poke. Sure, that's strong. Yep, that's valuable. Yep, that's positive. But you actually max W first. This means two things. It means that the mana cost being up 15 still matters, and it goes from 45 to 60, which generally speaking kind of means more than going 65 to 80 in a way. But it also means that this damage nerf from 20 to 10 instead of from 60 to 30 is all you're really receiving. Now, the actual Q active and the tendrils coming out, that damage is unchanged. It's still the same. But the buff that you give to your teammates, that's being cut down by half. Of course, with the 0.1 AP ratio included afterwards, that's not that hard to include. I mean, it's down 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Divided by 0.1 is 100, 150, sorry. Yeah, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300 AP to equalize. So it takes 100 to 300 AP to make up for this. And then beyond that number, it's higher. And I know for solo queue Sonas, they love to build ability power, so maybe not a nerf for them. The mana cost, obviously, in all cases is. And in laning phase, it still is a nerf. There's no way you have 100 AP at level 1. And if you are Q maxing, you don't have a 150, 200, 250, 300 AP. Never in a lane that early on. So the cost differences, again, quite substantial. Definitely meaningful. Worth noting, if you're on the back foot, if you are losing as Sona, and all you could do for your team is heal, that was unchanged. Your ability to play Sona as a pure heal bot did not go anywhere, but your ability to play Sona as a very abusive, very annoying poke bot definitely went down, and that's a positive thing, I'm pretty sure. Again, the damage, 100 to 300 is the difference off here. Okay, great. Small nerfs to Tarik. Tarik is another one of these overperforming tank supports. He didn't really substantially gain from the lack of MR on other people. I mean, there's a little bit of gain, but his damage is not that high. Mostly he just has so much armor that it buffed his W by a ton, and he's just doing really well with Aftershock. He's doing really well with Guardian, more so Guardian. But he gets 5 damage, or 5 armor off his kit. I also included his most common skill order, which I believe is W max last. I looked it up, and it was either second or third. I forget which, but either way, I included that because W has a % bonus armor ratio on it. Yes, a level 18 Tarik really had 123 armor out of the box. That's now 117. It's not massive, but hey, it's something. And yeah, basically this column on the right here is his physical durability difference. How much health he has against physical damage has been cut down by about 3%. He was overtuned or overpowered, tuned down a little bit lower. Great. Xin Zhao, another overperformer. And honestly, like with this patch, I've mentioned it before, I pretty much agree with all of these changes. I think they are all very, very good choices. And a lot of the cases like Ezreal, not enough, but Xin Zhao definitely overperforming. So he gets 30 base health and he loses 0.1 total attack damage off the W. So here's the big table for Xin Zhao. Right by the end of the game, the health values are so high it doesn't matter anymore. And of course, he's going to build things like a Titanic Hydra or Trinity Force or a Black Cleaver, and so it gets to matter even less over time. His W, which he seems to level up at level 3 and onwards. This is the base damage of the ability, just counting his base stats, because both halves of W have. This is, by the way, both halves of W, the sweep and the jab, I guess, or stab, or whatever it's going to be called, lunge, sweep and lunge. And so it's, yeah, you know, a fairly meaningful amount of damage output off. Obviously, the rest of his abilities still do full damage. His passive's still good. His Q's still good. His E's still exist, all the other stuff. But, you know, a somewhat meaningful amount of damage cut off the kit. Then, hey, it's 2.5 to 3% off of that. It's about 3% off his health. It exists. It's going to be like 1% off the win rate. Not a huge deal. But Xin Zhao needed the nerf, so great. There you go. 3 base AD off York definitely was doing too well also, and there's the numbers, 1.8 to 1.2%. Obviously, that's going to go down as well over time as he builds more attack damage, and he builds himself a Satanic Hydra and his Trinity Force and other things, his Sterix Gauge, etc. What's nice, this does affect both Trinity Force and Sterix Gauge, so it does not only nerf just his base AD and like the auto attack damage difference, but it nerfs his Sterix bonus AD. It nerfs his Trinity Force big Q bop to the tune of 9 damage instead of 3 damage because it does double your base AD on the Trinity Force proc. So this is actually pretty far reaching. Oftentimes you see 3 AD and you're like, okay, whatever, but York uses base AD a lot. I'm actually pretty sure that his ghouls also scale up base AD, so his ghouls do a bit less damage as well. And so his base attack damage actually travels pretty far. It's still not a big nerf. I'd be surprised if it was more than a 1% win rate difference, but still a thing. Zoe's the champions I've not seen a lot in games because I'm playing mostly normal draft and she's banned almost every time. I know her Q can do a lot of damage. There's a big chunk of like bug fixes and small things. Q cooldown is longer. It waits till it lands. These are all small bugs for the most part. Spell Thief off minions, you get less than a wave to use them. The little free summoner spells or active items, that's kind of nice. Sleepy Trouble Bubble only refunds partial cooldown on a champion hit, which is kind of nice. You get a bit longer to look the fact that you're drowsy. The slow is going a bit lower as well, so you can cover more distance while running away while drowsy. Maybe get over a wall with a flash or find a Tom Kent or something. Max distance going down. The trap rate is going down because Crucible actually removes sleep properly now. That's really good. Small bug fix on the E against the wall. So certainly Zoe's getting some small nerfs. These are all very minor, right? This is like, if you're going to look at the trajectory of Zoe's win rate, she starts at like 38, 40%. She goes up and to the right. I'm going to do this way, up and to the right because people learn the champion. She's at like 48% now. She's going to take a dip and then keep going up and to the right because people learn the champion some more. And she's still going to end up like 50% or something, you know, by the time 8.1 rolls around or something. But people are still learning Zoe. I think she is still probably on the strong end. I mean, these are somewhat meaningful nerfs. This is like a 0.5% win rate kind of nerf from all this stuff. Maybe a bit more. She'll definitely take a dip here, but she is probably still on the strong end, and I would expect nerfs in 8.1 on Zoe. I would expect that. I'm going to take a drink of water real quick and take a short break. Okay. Changes to Zyra. Well, her base stats, exact same mana regen profile as the Morgana got, which is great 1 through 9. Oops, that's a misclick. Sorry, let me try that again. Here's her base regen. Again, 1 through 9 more regen, 10 through 18 less regen. I very rarely encounter mana issues as Zyra late game. I don't think this part of it matters nearly as much. In fact, most players don't reach level 18 anyway. So you can like cut off the bottom third of this chart, and it's still accurate to your average game. You get all the green, you get only some of the red. Other changes are coming in. Okay. Your seeds don't spawn as far away on Zyra. They no longer like seek insanely far outside the brush. I'm pretty sure now any seed that spawns will actually be in range of your Q in some way. That's kind of nice. Plant duration. A summoned plant lasts longer. Here's that table. Pretty substantial, actually. And much like these regen changes, this means more for lower level champions because mid Zyra can reach 18, support Zyra never will. So, okay, more buffs to Zyra support. Buffs. I thought Zyra support was kind of playable already. She was like a 49, 50% win rate champion. Seems, reasonably playable. Okay, those are both buffs to Zyra support, and I mean, there's still buffs to mid Zyra. Don't get me wrong. This is literally a buff to everything. Okay, they don't spawn as far, but okay, that's okay, it's less abusive. There's some power here, but that's fine. Okay, the passive seeds don't last as long. The W seeds still last longer, but the passive seeds don't last as long. They last 2/3 as long. Okay, so they summon in a smaller radius, right? They don't go quite as far, and they don't last as long. So I have to use them basically within the wave they spawned, because by the time the next wave rolls in, my seeds have timed out. Okay, so they're closer to me. They're not around as long. It's a bit easier to play against the seeds. They're not as abusive on the receiving end. Okay, that's kind of nice. That's not quite as insane. That's a good thing. And of course, the W is still the same ability. That's fine. Plant health gets a change, and don't worry, it's not that big of a deal. Plant's worth less gold. Okay, so the way the damage to plants works, right? Instead of having 4 base health, they have 8 base health, but basically every kind of damage output got doubled. The only difference is dots and small minions and monsters either lost or went the same in damage output, but this gained health. There's 2 things to unpack here. So 1, small minions and monsters don't hit the plants quite as hard, the summoned plants, and things like Malzahar E or Morgana W aren't quite as good against them. But there's 2 big things, okay? Because the health no longer scales with W rank, they will now be reliably killed by the same things. They will always die to 2 basic attacks from range. They will always die to 1 basic attack from melee. Braum will now always one-shot a Zyra plant. Every spell will always one-shot a Zyra plant. 2 hits of an AoE spell will always, or 1 hit will always take half the health off, or 2 hits will always kill it. This is a huge win for a lot of champions that can actually reliably kill Zyra plants. There's honestly a lot of design wins in my mind around this change, this change, this change, and this change, with this involved as well. Playing against Zyra is so much less hellish. That is a very good thing. That's a very good thing. As compensation, she gets insane regen. When they are not killed, they last longer. But again, they can be killed more reliably. But they last longer. And if they are killed, they give a bit less gold. But these all feel like design wins to me. If I had to guess if it's a buff or a nerf, this overall, I'm pretty sure is a nerf to Zyra. But this is overall a buff to Zyra. We're also not done yet. Yeah, we already talked about this. No bonus health in the plants. That's fine. When Zyra kills an enemy, rampant gross recharge time is reduced by 20%. This is 100% for champions, large minions, and large monsters. Okay, so the passive definitely got nerfed, but active summoning got buffed because the plants last longer, And they aren't worth as much gold when they're killed. And I have more mana to summon plants with. And keep in mind that this mostly only helps if you are a laner of some kind, right? You're actually taking kills. In the mid lane, you're wave clearing. Bam. Every mini wave you clear is going to give you a W. Every mini wave is an extra seed, as long as you last hit well. Every killer assist an extra seed, and that's actually a really big deal because I've played a lot of Zyra support. I'm a Mastery 6 Zyra support, I think. It's one of my most played supports. I love mage supports. And you got into a lot of situations where you were taking a team fight and you just didn't have any seeds to use. And it's so nice to get seeds back on killer assist. This is really, really a big deal. This definitely matters for team fight output. I mean, this is very obviously a big team fight buff and a big a straight buff to Zyra. As a whole, yeah, I still think it's a buff to Zyra. The plants being killed more reliably is certainly a big deal. Certainly a big deal. But this is probably a buff to Zyra. Also, probably less so than Morgana, but potentially, because every enemy killed, and especially large monsters, gives you more seeds. And because small minions do 1/8 of a plant's health per auto attack, and because your mana regen is super high, there's a chance that Zyra can jungle. Because she's getting insane refund mechanics off of her W. Oddly enough, it's the same button on the keyboard as the Morgana. You have plants to help tank the damage output. It still takes 4 autos for blue buff to kill your plant. That's quite a while. They last freaking twice as long, almost, when you summon them in the first 3 levels. And then you get an extra plant back when you last hit it. I'm not convinced because at least the Morgana had lifesteal or spell vamp or healing based off of her ability damage. But in the same way that like you can jungle Graves and Kindred and stuff, you can maybe jungle Zyra. And I'm really intrigued by that. I want to know if you can do it. I will certainly try when the patch comes out. Zyra, much like Morg, so you have a long range route to gank with. That's kind of nice. There's a chance. Another little small buff as well. Enraged plants gain 50% bonus HP when you enrage them with the ultimate. So they are not killed nearly as easily. Now, your enraged plants don't die when auto attack to melee champions. That's kind of nice for her, I guess. All right, we're about an hour in. We've only gone through champions. It was a big patch. Thankfully, the rest is pretty small. A Bramble Vest seems to still be too good of a rush item. So the damage reflect is getting pretty hard screwed. Here's the damage here. So I want to point out the mechanics, right? Bramble Vest went from doing 15 damage to doing 3 plus 10% of the champion's bonus armor. Armor bought and armor gained from runes and armor gained from buffs. Bramble Vest gives 35 armor. So at base value, it returns 6.5 damage, which is obviously a nerf of over 50%. That's a pretty big deal. But if you bought 40 more armor, the nerf is only down to 70%. If you bought 85 armor, because you have like almost a Frozen Heart or a lot of other stuff, or you've built towards Thornmail backwards, or you have a Ninja Tabby and something else, like a Righteous Glory or whatever, 85 bonus armor plus Bramble Vest is equal. Very obviously, this is not going to be as good in the landing phase. That is for certain. For Rammus, it's not that hard to reach that. This probably buffs Bramble Vest on Rammus. In fact, it might mean that Rammus doesn't need to rush all the way to Thornmail, because it's that same bonus armor ratio that Thornmail had. Thornmail is, I want to say, 15 or 25 plus 10% bonus armor. This is just 3 plus 10% bonus armor. But because at like 175 bonus armor, which is totally reasonable to get to as your Rammus, yeah, you can just stay on Bramble Vest. That's probably doable. Maybe you just do that. Seems okay. So maybe Rammus won't rush all the way to Thornmail as a result, which I think is a good choice anyway. I think it's not that needed to rush to. Sunfire Cape. Obviously, yes to Ornn's Cape as well. aura damage going up by 14, but the bonus damage to minions, and I'm assuming monsters as well. I'm assuming, I don't know, but assuming to monsters as well is not nearly as high. Instead of doing triple damage, you're doing 1.5x damage. So here's the values there. Obviously, the base damage to champions is much, much higher. I cut out numbers 1 through 5 because there's no way to get a Sunfire pre-6 pretty much outside of obscene scenarios. But by the time you do build the item, even if you get it as early as level 6, which is probably still too early, but let's pretend, it's a substantial damage buff. And so we talked about this before with like Maokai getting less damage and how the tanks are doing, and with Bramble Vest getting nerfed as well. Tanks have a damage item back, and certainly by the end of the game, I mean, this is still pretty meaningful. It's still a 50%-ish damage buff. This still matters. But this is back in the territory of the damage up at a Sunfire Cape mattering a little bit. It does end up being a nerf to the wave clear, right? Instead of doing triple damage, it's 1.5x, and just the numbers aren't as high. It's not substantially worse. This isn't a huge deal. You're, a little bit weaker at wave clear, but to the tune of, 13 damage per second is, not nothing, but not insane. It's about as worse as you were doing more damage here, right? So I think you'll take the trade. I would consider this a Sunfire Cape buff. And what's nice about the world we live in right now is certainly Bramble Vest exists right now, so there's other, anti-fighter, like, damagey items for tanks to buy. But there are a lot of good tank items now. Like, when Sunfire Cape was first nerfed, there really weren't a lot of things worth buying. But people like Righteous Glory, people like Knight's Vow, people like Gargoyle Stoneplate, people like Ninja Tabby, okay? People like Thornmail. There's more than just Spirit Visage for magic resistance. You have more than one worthy MR item to buy. And so the old meta golem of Sunfire Cape, Iceborne Gauntlet, and Spirit Visage is gone. I think that you're not going to just meta golem those items anymore. And Sunfire Cape, I think deservingly so, is back in the world of viable tank items, which is good because I liked Sunfire Cape, generally speaking, as an item. And it's fun to play tanks and have, cool damage items like this. So good to see Sunfire Cape come back. Changes to runes, only a few of them actually matter. So Press the Attack was definitely by far the best rune in this, in the keystone slot of Precision. So Press the Attack getting nerfed. The exposure damage is now added after the damage from the attack that applies it. I'm assuming that exposure buffed both the Press the Attack triple hit, like that proc damage, as well as the auto attack damage itself. I'm assuming it's both. Lethal Tempo's cooldown goes down from 10 to 6. I want to point out Lethal Tempo's cooldown starts when the effect ends. So what I mean by this is you trigger Lethal Tempo, warms up for a second, you get your attack speed buff, and that lasts, and then it cools down. And then that cooldown is what goes from 10 to 6 seconds. And so it's not like you're going to have permanent lethal tempo. You still have that 6-second wind down no matter what, plus the 1.5 or ish or whatever it takes to re-trigger the thing and then come back into it. In my mind, this is not a very big buff. It exists, it matters to some degree, but it doesn't wow me about lethal tempo. That doesn't make me go, ooh, I want to try this now. But the Press the Attack nerf is actually bigger than you would think. And then also there's the Fleet Footwork changes where the heal is going up quite a bit over time. The ratio is getting tripled for AD, doubled for AP, and it even scales off 40% of crit damage. So I have numbers. Suppress the Attack. What I did, by the way, is I chose Tristana as my example champion. I said, okay, if you're Tristana with just your base stats, and you hit someone 3 times, here's how much damage it did in 723, and here's what it does in 724. And obviously, the 724, the 30 to 120, is the exact just damage of Press the Attack itself. It's 30 to 120. Bam. Easy stuff. And this is 12% of that number, plus 12% of Tristana's total attack damage. And you can see it's actually a pretty meaningful damage cut, right? It's more than 12% off the damage because only the old version was amplifying Tristana or whoever's base AD. It's actually a pretty meaningful cut in the damage down. This is actually a meaningful amount of damage. It's 11 damage off the trade, or later on in the game, 27 damage off the trade, or even later on in the game, even more than that, 12% of how much more attack damage you buy. If you crit, even more. You now do 120, and then you do your 12% bonus damage from then on for the next 6 seconds or whatever it takes. Fleet Footwork Also, even though you wouldn't have guessed it, right? Okay, 5 to 50 becomes 3 to 60. This seems like you've just stretched out the ability, right? Weaker early, stronger late. But because this is only -2 and this part's +10, it gets strong really quickly. It gets stronger at level 4. So yes, your super, super early lane is less sustained. Yeah, that's fine. But very quickly, you're getting more heal. Also, again, the AD ratio has tripled and the AP ratio has doubled. And so there is a lot gained here. Yeah, the heal is not insanely higher. It only goes up 20%. But because the ratios go up quite a lot, this is actually pretty nice. I had seen some complaints on a Reddit thread about this when it was on the PvE patch notes. Doesn't this go against the design goals of Fleet Footwork, taking it, like the idea of Fleet Footwork shouldn't only be for crit users? And yeah, I understand that thought process, but I feel like with the AP ratio being 0.4, that if you're playing, let's say, AP Victor, well, obviously AP Victor, and you have 600 AP by the mid to late game, your auto attack now provides you like 300 health or so. That's a lot of health for a keystone to trigger every few seconds. That's really meaningful, that when you Q and then, Lichbane them, right? Your Q gives you move speed. You've got your Lichbane ready. You zap them. You trigger Fleet Footwork and Lichbane. So now you've done damage, shielded yourself, hasted, damaged them, and healed, and gained another haste to go run away. And this feels really good on some kitey mages who might want to auto attack. And keep in mind, like, Fleet Footwork still gives you a pretty good amount of move speed, and it lasts, I think, a full second. This AP ratio going up to something actually meaningful puts it into the spectrum of being a potentially viable mage pick. Now, the problem is you'll have to go precision and have attack speed on them, and Victor doesn't want to have attack speed for his path bonus, so I understand there's some issues here still to work out. But it gets closer to the realm of viability. And you look at a champion like Kale, who builds ability power, or even Teemo, who might want to use Fleet Footwork, but maybe still go AP. You start to get into the realm of viability with this kind of stuff. And so Fleet Footwork might actually be a usable keystone. Press the attacks nerfs are actually pretty good. And Lethal Tempo, there was never a single champion in the game where Lethal Tempo was their optimal keystone. But was press the attack nerfs, Lethal Tempo getting some buffs, maybe we get there. I'm not sure. Like, in my mind, I don't super love the Lethal Tempo buffs, but maybe it's better than I'm giving it credit for. Maybe it'll be fine. I know we were seeing Lethal Tempo used some by pros. Deft was running it in the Kespa Cup finals, for example, on Callista. Maybe some other games. I didn't watch the games yet, but I think this was definitely a very weak rune and needed some buffs. More changes to precision, though. Overheal getting buffed by 1/3. Triumph getting nerfed by 20%. Presence of Mind getting buffed by 20%. Definitely meaningful to have these changes. These are all in the same path, of course. That's why they're tabbed this way. This is the heroism, whatever, slot within the precision path. Triumph was definitely the best of all these runes. By a long shot, it was optimal on basically everyone. I think Presence of Mind is certainly very, very, very good. Unfortunately, there is still no non-damage oriented runes for like mage supports in precision yet, so I still can't recommend going like Presence of Mind on like Sona, really, because there's no 2 runes for it to grab. But this is maybe now optimal on someone like Kassadin. That's a nice thing. And then a very, very small nerf to coup de grace. From what I've seen from actual data, coup de grace is not that much stronger than other runes. It is certainly amazing on ARAM because you're getting kills and assists all the time, and you're getting that AD and AP stacked all the time. But outside of that, the win rates for like regular League of Legends play are pretty close between this and other things. And there's some champions where it's already not the right choice for them. So I'm okay with it being a love tap. Again, I think a lot of the options are still pretty close together. Domination eyeball tracking was certainly a little bit too good. This is the bonus AD and AP on kills, assists, and ward kills. It used to be 2 kills, 2 stacks per kill or assist, and 1 stack per ward. Now it's 2 stacks per kill and 1 stack per ward or assist, so a small nerf there. This is generally the highest performing rune in this slot already, so more reason to go towards Zombie Ward, which is great because I think Zombie Ward is a super, super sick rune and really cool to see. Nice tooltip change to the the Hunter runes that you can actually tell who you've gone for. That's really, really nice. Big change here to sorcery. Phase Rush now granted to ranged champions. Slow resist. Oh, baby. This is huge for someone like Aurelion Sol. For a lot of champions who missed old Storm Raider Surge, wanted it back. Well, it still requires 3 hits to trigger, but you are definitely getting your slow resist again, so you can get away from some of these crazy, crazy annoying ganks. Enjoy being speedy once again. Have fun. This is a big deal. Huge buff to them. I don't play mid lane very much, so I don't really know the Phase Rush users that well, / the old Storm Raiders users, but this is certainly back on the market. And this will end up replacing Aerie on a lot of champions as a result, because Aerie was very optimal on a lot of people. Very required nerf to Celerity. Celerity is probably... I think it might still be the strongest non-Keystone rune in the game, but there's enough competition in that slot alongside Celerity that it's not... This is probably an okay enough nerf. Like, Celerity will probably still be, on the plurality of champions, the best rune of the 3 if you're going sorcery. But there will still be enough other front runners with other champions that it's fine. And so it's like, Celerity is sort of balanced, basically. I think this might be enough of a nerf, such that sorcery secondary is no longer optimal all the time on every marksman. But for basically everyone from Vayne to Draven to Ezreal, you always went Celerity, and usually Gathering Storm, on all of them, because Celerity was too good, and then you're like, well, I'm already here, and it's either Mana Flow banned, or maybe I'll go, like, then there are actual choices after Celerity. But Celerity is so good, you always want Sorcery Secondary, and so I'm really glad to see Celerity nerf, because I like choices. I will probably still run a lot of it. It's still very, very strong, but hey, that's kind of a nice thing. This is a very much needed nerf. Changes to Resolve, +1 MR on Mirror Shell. This is one of those love taps towards saying, hey, you know what, guys? Mage is running a bit too well. Let's buff this magic resist by 1. It's not a very big buff. It's not going to change a lot of people's ideas, but it will remind people to try Mirror Shell in those bad matchups, like when you're playing up against a Ziggs Zyra bot lane, maybe you're on Mirror Shell. One thing I have noticed of looking at data is, and just looking at the tooltips and reading up on them, a lot of Resolve's runes are really bad as a secondary, because if you're not a tank or a heavy bruiser who wants the Resolve Keystones in the first place and the health bonus, you just don't really get a lot out of running the runes. Like the Regen 1 second wind, right? It scales off your max health, or your missing health, but ostensibly, or via scaling off of missing health, it really does also scale off your max health, because you can't miss more than your max HP. And if you're at 200 health, you just can't be in lane anymore. Whereas if you're at 400 health, maybe you can. And Maokai can lose 600 HP and be at 400, and Ashe can lose 600 HP and be dead. There's differences there. So it's hard to go for things like Second Wind. Obviously, like the percent HP thing from Overgrowth is hard to go if you're not a full tank in the first place. And there's not a lot of good runes for Resolve unless you're already a tank. So Mirror Shell is one of them. And then finally, a little something here, Revitalize. Boosts, shields, any heals cast on you. So if you have a Janna or a Sona or a Soraka on your team, now you can finally choose to go Revitalize and not feel like a chump. That is a really big deal. It is definitely a really big deal, because there's finally 2 different runes in different slots that non-tanks can use and feel good about. There's still not a lot of options. Honestly, there's still, I think, a lot of room to go in opening up Resolve to non-tank users, because so much of it is really, really tank exclusive, or it's like obvious shielding support, right? It's like, I'm Sona, I'm running Guardian and Font of Life, and I was already running Revitalize, and then, oh, okay, I can run Conditioning or whatever, right? Like, it was easy if you're a shielding support, but it was not easy as anyone else that wasn't already like a melee tankish type champion. So that's a good to see. Finally, another rune to run. Could be nice. Okay. Kleptomancy is an interesting situation right now. It certainly has some really big front runners in Ezreal and Sona. Also Illaoi, interestingly enough. And it used to give you 25 bonus attack range when it was ready to go, so your autos would be stronger. What's funny is Ezreal didn't really care about the bonus attack range. I'm sure he could use it. Like, it's still a nerf to Klepto, and I'm sure there were times where Ezreal used the attack range, and this will still be a nerf to Ezreal. But it's almost more of a nerf to everyone else except Ezreal, because Ezreal applied it by pressing Q. And I am almost certain this did not extend Q's range. I am practically certain about that. So I think there is a lot of room to go in terms of finding other good Klepto users, but it certainly is going to nerf Sona because she can't Q auto as easily. It can nerf someone like a Lowy with their like W attacking you and stuff like that. It was actually one of Nasus's best keystones because it turns out getting bonus range in your Q is a really big deal for Nasus. So Kleptomancy is a big Nasus rune. We'll see what the fallout from this is. I think this in the short term hurts Kleptomancy because it's going to further stymie the user base, and it's going to need some more larger work to find a real user. Because it was like interesting to see Swain try it. It was interesting to see Victor try it, right? So you can Q auto and like get that zap in. Like it was actually like this was what was giving it more uses than just Ezreal. So we'll see what it goes. I mean, this will definitely nerf Sona as well. Like I said, Ezreal got way lighter nerfs than Sona did. I know they're intentionally being not deceptive. They're intentionally not spilling the ingredients of how the loot tables and stuff work with this, but basically, I don't remember what it is exactly anyway. But I guess they're hoping to decrease variance in loot over time, and hopefully this will buff it a little bit. And I mean, maybe potentially is the goal is to reduce the gap between extreme cases. So, you know, maybe this loot table actually will help that, you know, there's some tracking behind the scenes that it knows how many things you've gotten. And maybe if you didn't trigger Klepto very often, when it gives you the sacks of gold will give you the max amount. Like there's things they could do to definitely like balance out Klepto a bit and help the bad users. And so maybe that'll come in at some point. I don't know. Maybe it already is. I don't know. Some interface updates. That's kind of nice. Dark Harvest, way too good on ARAM. Absolutely. Still going to be too good on ARAM, but hey. And I think they're kind of aware of this. Like they know Dark Harvest is insane on ARAM, right? They're nerfing it first patch. This will still be the best keystone for a lot of champions. And to a certain point, that's kind of okay because like it's a mode where you get 50 kills a game. Yeah, it turns out things that trigger on killing is just pretty strong. And like ARAM's not going to be that balanced anyway. Treeline getting hunts for bounty hunter runes via the altars is kind of nice. I had the Herald ping next to turret inhibitor. That's kind of nice. Little UI buffs are always really cool. Good to see those. Upgraded icons for Amumu. These look pretty. Upgraded icons for Dr. Mundo. These also look pretty. Upgraded icons for Nunu. That's cool looking. Upgraded icons for Renekton. These don't look too bad in the first place, but I guess they're even better now. It's cool. I'm excited for the health bar update. I think this is really, really nice. There's more crazy art saying, hey, they're spell shielded. Hey, they're invulnerable. It's been updated, I guess. More icons say, hey, they're going to get revived. They're resurrecting. They're unkillable. Letting you know that they can't be CC'd. Hey, their armor and MR is up or down. Something. This is really cool. I love things like this. One thing I have asked for a very long time is making it very obvious that another champion is stronger than I am. Something like World of Warcraft, where like there's like a red skull around a boss, or their level is red instead of green, so you know they're higher level instead of lower level than you. That's something I've asked for, and I know I've told to the right people. And hopefully we do it at some point. But I really, really think health bar clarity, just like this champion is X, is a really big deal to me. So I'm glad to see at least some of this stuff kind of coming in. Some animations for burst damage, although you can turn it off. I wouldn't, but hey, whatever. Burst healing. Some more colors and timing stuff that'll be nice. So I love UI changes. I love just like the game is better changes. I personally I react to that very strongly. So that's really cool. No size changes, non-chummy health bars. They're like trying very hard to keep all the sizes the same so that it's last hitting feels the same, objectives might feel the same, etc., etc. Little minor things for like 4K support and whatnot. So hey, cool. It's a good team. I like these people who are on it, and I love UI changes, UI buffs. That's really nice. Some small champion bios in the client. You can invite strangers to your party without making them friends, which is kind of nice. This is actually really good because my friends is very frequently full. And I'm at the point now where I would have to actually remove people that I actually talk to or have spoken with or like, actually like to add a new friend. So being able to at least play with people a little bit more easily is a good thing for me. Clubs up to 100 people. Yay. More skins. Ambitious Elf Jinx, Santa Draven, and Snow, Fawn, Poppy, beautiful. Some emotes, oh baby. Some returning emotes. Some missions. I actually freaking love missions. I don't know about you guys, and I've had some discussions about this on Reddit, and I have different opinions from other people. I thankfully have a lot of friends that I can do 5-bans with. I actually play 5-bans most nights that I play League of Legends right now. But I just love missions but they're basically, to complete that thought, sorry. A lot of people have complained about missions that required full pre-mades. I understand the complaint. I personally don't, I understand it's a valid complaint, but I guess I don't want to get into that topic now. Anyway, I freaking love missions. I freaking love missions. This is almost my favorite part of every patch is more missions to earn sick emotes, some skins, some stuff. I freaking love missions. They're so fun. And so I'm happy to have more missions. That's pretty sweet. Poro King going to come back in for the game mode. Snow Battle All Random Earth. You have to play a champion or a champion skinned in something Snowdown-like. Which means I think Frostblade Aurelia exists, but only Frostblade Aurelia. You can play Braum, because he's from the Freljord at all times, on probably almost any of his skins. You can only play Draven if it's Santa Draven. That's kind of fun. I like that. So it's a small... Oh yeah, and you can play Jingle Bells Sona. Enjoy your overpowered champion. But it's also all random. So you can only get the ones that that the game gives you. Anyway, I think it's super cool. Whole bunch of stuff that I really... too many bug fixes to read through. Oh, apparently there were some updates to Blitzcrank skins. I guess I didn't notice that. Whatever. Hextech Kog'Maw. Ooh. I didn't know this was coming out. So that's coming out as well. Cool. And that's the patch rundown. It was a very long one. It was almost an hour and a half long because there were so many changes. And my throat is very dry, so I'm going to be done for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please give me a follow or a sub or whatever. You guys are amazing. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.